This meeting is now being recorded.
Sponsored by Copper Services, today's webinar, Do You Know What I Know About You? Only 20% Do, is presented by Neil Eady. Neil Eady is a speaker, consultant, and a psychology lecturer in both the Technical College and UW system in Wisconsin. He is also the founder of Life IQ, where he motivates groups and individuals to work, play, relate, and live intelligently. Neil's impressive client list includes over a dozen Fortune 500 companies, including Wells Fargo, Walmart, Merrill Lynch, BASF, and numerous clients from around the world. Neil is a master practitioner Myers-Briggs type indicator consultant and has worked with many groups using this effective personality tool. He was a recent personality consultant to Women's World magazine, and his work has also been featured in a Myers-Briggs ad campaign. He and his wife have 2 children and live in Appleton, Wisconsin. On a random note, if he had to choose a favorite Muppet, it would have to be Beaker. At this point, I would like to turn the call over to Neil. Neil, you may now begin.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you to Copper Services for hosting this event. You know, I am a Beaker fan. If I had to choose a favorite Muppet, I just appreciate his dedication to the sciences despite the calamity that often ensues. And, you know, if you're having a bad day, go out on YouTube, put in a search for Beaker's Ballad. It's going to bring a smile to your face. So anyway, thank you very much for spending some time with me today. It's great to see some familiar names in this webinar, so thank you for joining us. We've got a great, fun topic, and I trust over the next 40 minutes or so, you'll find some nuggets to help increase your personal and professional effectiveness. As Ross said, I'm Neil Eady. I'm the founder of Life IQ, and it's my privilege to work with individuals and groups to help them work, play, relate, and live intelligently. And part of that is living an intentional life. And as we talk about self-awareness today, we're going to be talking about the theme of intentionality as we go through the presentation today. A little bit about myself. I've got a undergrad in psychology and sociology. I've got a master's in marriage and family therapy. And as Ross said, I'm a master practitioner of the MBTI, which means that I've put in thousands of hours of work to get that distinction, and I'm quite proud of that. And it also means that I'm a huge Myers-Briggs nerd, as you can tell by the picture as well. I spent the first half of my career in clinical psychology settings. Worked with delinquent adolescents in group homes, outpatient therapy. It was really, the way I looked at it, it was like free parent training. It was wonderful. I worked in an acute psychiatric setting, drug and alcohol rehab, and then I migrated the second half of my career to more organizational psychology and doing training and development in those areas. The topic today, do you know what I know about you? Only 20% do. It refers to the fact that studies tell us that only 20% of people in organizations are self-aware. It refers to this strange phenomenon that in a relatively short amount of time, I can know more about you than you may know about yourself. And a lot of that happens with first impressions. When we meet someone, what are our initial reactions there? When we first meet or experience someone, we immediately begin forming a framework or theory based on their appearance, their confidence, their presence. We are sizing them up. Are they friendly, likable, trustworthy, polite? Psychologists call this process the primacy effect. I used to be a fan of American Idol. I haven't watched it for a few years in here, but what I would love about those first shows when they were doing the mass auditions is predicting by even those 5 seconds when they walked into the room to go find that X on the floor and find their spot, what kind of confidence did they walk in with? And in trying to predict, are they going to move on to Hollywood based on just that little information alone? But you can pick up tons of information based on our behaviors. In another presentation called 10 Mistakes New Managers Make and How to Avoid Them, I discussed the fact that your people want to know if you are competent, capable, and worthy of their allegiance, and they'll make that decision within a matter of days. The first conversations, the first meetings, the first initiatives all set precedents that can take months to undo if you start out on the wrong foot. No pressure, right? So first impressions are important, and we're constantly giving out information about ourselves. And this whole idea that we can read someone and know someone in a relatively short amount of time has led to this sociologically fascinating topic, or a movement of speed dating. I'm sure we've been part of this, where we're out on a date and you know, a few minutes into it we go, oh no, you know, this is going to be a long dinner, this is going to be a long evening, because I already know this isn't a match. Well, basically they took that concept and said, we can figure that out, who we want to be compatible with, who we feel like there's some sort of connection. We can do that within 5 or 6 minutes. And so if you're unfamiliar with speed dating, it's absolutely fascinating. Basically, you know, it's like 50 first dates at once. They sit you down, you get about 5, 6 minutes, they ding a bell, and then you move on to the next person. And if you like them and if they like you, you write down their number and they will write down yours and they'll match you up later. But it's that whole concept that in those few minutes I can get to know you and even maybe know some things that you don't know about yourself. This whole concept of being self-aware does feel a little fuzzy to me. When you ask these people, are you self-aware, and 20%, we're saying only 20% of the people in organizations are, what does that mean? To what depth do we go to? What's the definition of self-awareness? But if I ask you, are you self-aware, simply nod your head if you are self-aware. I know I can't see you, but just the thought of a bunch of heads nodding up and down while you're sitting at your desk brings a smile to my face. So if you are self-aware, just kind of nod your head and give yourself a nice affirmation. I'm guessing that most of us on this webinar would say, yes, we are self-aware, but we don't get the privilege of asking those who know us, would you say that Neil is self-aware? One manager I was working with several years ago completed his self-evaluation for his 360, and his numbers were way off from what his report said about him. On a scale of 1 to 10 on self-awareness, he claimed he was, yeah, you guessed it, he claimed he was a 10, but the numbers just didn't match up at all. And how in depth do we need to go before we can declare ourselves to be self-aware? If you would have asked me this question 15 years ago, I would have said, absolutely, I'm self-aware. But I look back now and say, no way, I didn't have a clue who I was. And I'll probably look back in 15 years and say, man, I didn't have a clue on this, and here I was teaching other people how to become more aware of themselves and their personality. So we have to put this in context a little bit. When I was first trained in Myers-Briggs, I remember asking the facilitator if our personalities change at all. 3 out of my 4 letters had changed since I had took it in college. And she responded that our personalities are consistent and they don't change, but it may take a while for us to learn about ourselves and to become self-aware. And I remember bristling at that answer a little bit. Based on my undergrad and graduate work, we did a lot of self-analyzing during that time. So I'm sitting there stewing a little bit saying, well, doggone it, I think I'm pretty self-aware here. But she was right. She was dead on. It did take me a while to identify what my true type was. It's not that I couldn't do those things and that those things were part of my personality, but it wasn't who my true type was. And so even there was kind of a leap forward in my self-awareness. As we go through life, we develop patterns of actions, thoughts, opinions, and beliefs that sometimes they become so habitual that they disappear from our view. We're no longer aware of them. It's like wearing a pair of glasses. Because they are always there, we forget how they influence what we see in this Johari window, and I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but it does a nice job of just kind of graphing out what is known to others and known to self. That's known as my public self. and we'll talk about that in a bit. But I think some of these gaps are unknown to self but known to others. That's where my blind spots are. Those are those areas that others easily see in me, but I may not see them myself. Known to self, unknown to others. Those are things that I keep hidden, that I keep private. And then there's this whole unconscious self, which is really fascinating, because if we include how we behave unconsciously, and it's scary how influenced we are by context and culture, that we're not even aware of some of our behaviors. I don't know how much we could truly say we are self-aware, because we are responding to many subliminal clues. I appreciated you nodding your heads to indicate that you are self-aware, but I also know that studies show that if you can get participants to nod at any point in your presentation, they are more likely going to be they're more likely going to like what they heard. They're going to be more agreeable with what the message is. So I appreciate you participating in that. But there's also studies that show if you put subliminal words, I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell, and he outlines some of these tests that have gone on in the psychological field where, they had participants doing sentence descrambling, and within those sentence descrambling, they had key words, and those key words ended up having a subliminal effect that the participants were totally unaware of. And once they become aware of them, the effects no longer work. So I'm not going to point out the subliminal words that I've put in this presentation. There's some great experiences with popcorn studies, with rope experiments, just fascinating kind of things. So in our time today, we need a better definition of self-awareness and the different degrees of self-awareness as well. And so this is what we're going to talk about today: self-awareness definition and degrees, how self-awareness can increase your personal and professional effectiveness, and then how to increase your self-awareness. So let's talk about definition and some degrees of self-awareness. Self-awareness is a precursor to self-regulation and self-confidence. If you've read Daniel Goleman and his books on emotional intelligence, you know that he says that self-awareness is the cornerstone of emotional intelligence. You just need it before you can have any other of the characteristics of being emotionally intelligent. It's absolute cornerstone. So when you think about only 20% of people in organizations are self-aware, what does that say about how emotionally intelligent some of these organizations are? So before you can have any kind of self-regulation and self-confidence, also hallmarks of emotional intelligence, you have to have self-awareness. And the example that I will give here comes from my personal life. I was, to my horror, and this was probably about 10 years ago now, I realized that I didn't have AAA. I am mechanically challenged. Any project that I look to do, home improvement project, an hour and a half later, I'm so much worse off than I was just, when I started the whole project. I just have no aptitude in those areas. So I couldn't believe that I had gone so long in my life without having AAA, because if I got a flat tire somewhere, I would be in serious trouble. And sure enough, the next year I did end up having a flat tire. Now, the flat tire occurred in my garage. And I thought, what am I going to do with this situation? I don't know how to change it, and I don't want to change it. So that's why I got AAA, but it's in my garage. I feel like I should maybe be able to handle this a little bit. But then I said, you know what, I have no problem. In fact, there for a second I thought about going into the house. I was bringing my kids someplace, and I thought about going and getting dressed up for work and acting like I was in a hurry, and that's why I couldn't get my clothes dirty and all this kind of stuff. And I said, you know what, it doesn't matter. I have no pride in this area whatsoever. And so I know I have strengths in other areas. So, we called him up, and I guarantee that guy who came out and changed that tire, he's told that story, I'm sure, many, many times over. Definition. Self-awareness is the capacity to become the object of one's own attention. self-awareness is the capacity to become the object of one's own attention. Now, that's a pretty broad definition, so we're going to have to drill down here a little bit to understand some different levels and degrees of self-awareness. 3 that we're going to talk about today: public self-awareness, private self-awareness, and meta self-awareness. Let's start out with public. Public self-awareness. Public self-aspects are visible attributes such as behavior and physical appearance. People who have public self-awareness can give an accurate account of their actions and behaviors throughout the day. And if you think about that, well, that sounds simple enough, but to retrace your steps throughout the day and give an accurate accounting of how you spent your time, the behaviors, the conversations, the interactions, that does take a little bit to understand and be able to recount all those behaviors. And all behavior is meaningful. Where you sit in a room, how early or how late you come to a meeting, the type and color of clothes you wear, the way you drive, the bumper stickers on your car. I am absolutely fascinated. The sociologist in me is fascinated with the messages that people project out to the world through their bumper stickers. So I went and gathered a few of these messages on bumper stickers that I've seen. You know, keep honking, I'm deaf. If you can read this, I'm not impressed. Most people can read. What message are they sending out to the world? I'm hung like Einstein and smart as a horse. I'm not sure what they want to communicate there. And this, and this is an actual license plate in Oregon, PMS 24/7. So all behavior is meaningful. What we project out there has to do with our public self-awareness and even our ability to describe physical characteristics. I remember many conversations in college, sitting in the dorm room, sitting around with the guys, and we were looking at the student directory, and we have a pretty accurate self-awareness of the level of girl that we think we can, you know, con into going on a date with us. And the goal was always to get someone, you know, 1 or 2 points higher than yourself. I mean, then you're really getting someone that's out of your league. You're a pretty lucky guy if you can make that happen. But there's something about that, understanding your physical characteristics. And there's a fascinating game that goes on in the online dating world, how you describe yourself. I know there's pictures out there, but there also sometimes the descriptions don't necessarily fit the picture. So I'm giving you an example where I'm giving you the description beforehand, and then we'll take a look at the picture. But this gentleman said, you know, I'm a cuddly, svelte, young teddy bear with the pipes to protect any maiden in distress. So just take a minute and picture this individual who describes himself as a cuddly, svelte, young teddy bear with the pipes to protect any maiden in distress. Got that person in your mind? You got him pictured? Okay. Did they look anything like this? So I would say this individual in this situation probably doesn't have the greatest public self-awareness based on his description of himself. All right, private self-awareness consists of externally unobservable events and characteristics such as emotions, physiological sensations, perceptions, values, goals, motives, etc. And we'll explore this one in much greater depth because this is kind of the classic definition of self-awareness. Are we aware of our emotions? Do we understand what physiologically goes on with us when we are getting angry or irritated or anxious? Do we have values, goals, motives, those kind of things? So that's what we'll spend most of our time. And then meta-self-awareness. Meta-self-awareness is being aware that one is self-aware. I know we're getting very, very deep here. I am aware of the fact that I'm angry. I'm currently analyzing my emotional state of feeling angry. And you're able to contemplate others' experience. Now, if we get to this deeper level of self-awareness, if we get to a meta-self-awareness level, we're analyzing the fact that we can analyze our emotions. we're in a pretty good state there because emotions won't run rampant with us. I am feeling frustrated. Why am I feeling frustrated? Well, I'm going to analyze why I'm feeling frustrated. And if you can pinpoint the origin of some of these emotions, it gets you in a much better position to be able to intercept them and do something about that. So there's meta self-awareness. All right, let's jump back to private self-awareness. Begins with emotional self-awareness, understanding our emotions and what we're feeling throughout the day. With my kids, from when they were very, very little on up, we did an exercise called Mad, Sad, Glad. And so at bedtime or even at the dinner table, we would talk through our day. And we would talk about situations. Okay, when were you mad today? Give me a couple examples of when you were mad today. Were you feeling sad at all? Yeah, Josie stepped on my foot, and she didn't say she was sorry, and the teacher didn't have a whole lot of time to give me for attention. Okay, they felt sad there. Or glad. What made you feel happy? And as we talk through those and reinforce just that emotional self-awareness of some of those basic emotions, as they've gotten older, we start introducing more sophisticated emotions. It evolves more to talking about, were you embarrassed? Were you frustrated? When were you curious today? What was it that piqued your attention or piqued your curiosity a little bit? Let's explore that. When were you disappointed? And I know you're familiar with this FACES chart, and I use this FACE chart a lot when I was dealing with some of these tough adolescent kids that I was working with to help them identify some emotions as well. But emotional self-awareness really is asking at any given moment in any given day, are you able to accurately describe your emotion? A couple of years ago, I was involved in a project at a time that I had a lot of plates spinning. An individual was calling with questions that I didn't have the answers to, and they were more on top of the process than I was. I found that I was owly and scowly for about a 36-hour period, and I was short with my wife and kids, and I had to identify my emotion, frustration, anxiety, insecurity, recognize the source, not delivering, others questioning my expertise, and own it. Say, I'm responsible for this. I'm not going to blame others for this. This isn't their fault. They're not nitpicky. They're asking legitimate questions. I didn't have the answers to it. I wasn't on top of it. And I needed to recognize that my family had nothing to do with my angst, and yet they weren't getting the best of me in those situations. I was taking out some of my anxiety and frustration on them. So being emotionally self-aware is identifying those emotions, the cause of them, and doing something about that. The whole advantage of understanding your emotions is being able to intercept them before they become destructive, or figuring out how to repeat them when they are happy. A friend of mine has 2 kids, and they were both taking piano lessons, and he helped his son write a simple song for a recital, and they played this duet together at his first recital. And he was telling me that this was one of the hallmark moments of his parenting so far, and just one of his proudest moments. But we also talked about the fact that took time and effort and discipline, and all those kind of things culminated on stage in this performance that was just a source of elation for him. And now he knows how to recreate those kind of experiences. They don't happen simply. There are some simple joys in life, but sometimes those great projects or works of art that you've spent a lot of time on, it does take some time and discipline, but he was able to recognize that. Values. Individuals and organizations, for that matter, need to understand their values, and those that have identified them can reflect on them and nuance their values. They know what they stand for, and those values help shape and guide their interactions and behaviors. Values give one a foundation, an anchor. As I teach my kids, without values, you are vulnerable to be persuaded by others who are reacting, and most likely reacting unconsciously, to the whims of their emotions and desires. Just last week, in fact, my daughter's 4th grade soccer team won a tough game on the road, and they wanted to celebrate with a cheer, and the coach, without thinking, suggested they do it on the field since the sideline was cluttered with their bags and water bottles, etc. So the girls ran to the center of the field and did the cheer, and it wasn't a huge deal, but it wasn't a great idea and could easily be taken as being disrespectful to the other team. So in the debrief after the game, and our kids know that we debrief a lot of things, we talked to our daughter about this and why, how it could be perceived by the other team and why it shouldn't be done again. The very next night, they had another soccer game, also on the road, also a tough game that they won, and the team wanted to do a cheer in the middle of the field again. But our daughter stood up and said no, and was able to articulate the values we discussed, showing respect and being a good sport in that situation. So understanding your values, living them out. And then goals and motivations, talking about that intentionality about life. If you're floating through life and just kind of going from one thing to another, that's fine. But people with goals and motivations understand what they're working toward. They stretch themselves. They have more self-discipline. And the motivations, understanding the motivations behind some of our behavior. We know that all behavior is meaningful. And so someone like myself who is constantly self-analyzing, this was probably 15, 20 years ago when I was working for a particular hospital, and they had a very nice parking ramp right beside their building, but I was always parking out on the street. And then, after several months, something changed, and I started parking within the parking ramp. And of course, I had to, analyze that. This is a change in behavior. What has changed? What's been my motivation? And I understood then that I felt more a part of that work group there. I felt more a part of the hospital, and so in a kind of a weird Freudian way, I was willing to put myself under their protection underneath their parking ramp. But understanding the motivations behind our behavior is very much in line with private self-awareness. Practice typically improves self-awareness. There's individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures out there. We think of some of the Eastern cultures, Japan, Korea, as being more collectivist. They put the goals of the group ahead of their own individual goals. In our country, we are very much an individualistic culture, a narcissistic culture. We seem to be hardwired to think about ourselves. In fact, I often talk to my psychology students. We have Erickson's, developmental stages, and at some point you need to get beyond yourself and understand that there's others out there and how to be a productive member of society. And we talk about the fact how social networking sites, specifically Facebook, may help stunt that growth a little bit because, in adolescence, the world is this stage. Everyone cares about me. But you move out of that, Facebook somehow keeps us arrested at that place because we think the whole world needs to know about our daily lives, or, Twitter and putting out what is going on there a little bit. So we are hardwired to think about ourselves in this culture. Parents explore domain name availabilities before naming a child. You can check out babysquatter.com to see that somewhat sad reality. We're about personal branding, marketing ourselves. It would seem reasonable to assume that people who engage more frequently in situational or dispositional self-observation are likely to attain higher levels of self-awareness compared to individuals who don't. But quantity does not always mean quality. A large and diversified body of literature suggests that although people think they know themselves well, in actuality they don't. What are some reasons for this? Well, number one, we may not be honest with ourselves. We may be getting feedback. We may just not like what we're hearing, and so that produces some cognitive dissonance in us. And that's a social psychology term of cognitive dissonance, meaning that we have very strong belief systems about ourselves. And so if I believe that I am an intelligent individual, but all the papers that I keep getting back at school I get C's on, I have to somehow reconcile those two things. And so someone who does not want to be honest with themselves may say, well, that teacher is just a hard grader, or she just really doesn't understand what I'm trying to portray here, and so it must be their fault and not my fault. So we're not honest with ourselves. we may not be teachable, and that's something that's a theme in several of the presentations that I give, is being teachable, being humble enough and to hear some things that we may not want to hear, but we need to grow. With being teachable, you need to have a certain level of self-confidence, because your confidence is going to get rocked sometimes when you are teachable, and when you're hearing some negative feedback. You need to have a foundation of some good self-identity there. But it is when we're teachable that we learn so much more about ourselves. And then yeah, lastly, because we lack self-confidence, we don't want to hear some of those tough things. And although it makes sense to believe that self-awareness in itself should sharpen self-perception and produce more accurate self-knowledge, empirical evidence to this effect is inconsistent. Researchers propose that people actually engage in two forms of self-focus: self-reflection and self-rumination. Self-reflection is defined as a genuine curiosity about the self, where the person is intrigued and is interested in learning more about his or her emotions, values, thought processes, attitudes, etc. Interested in discovering both positive and negative aspects about themselves. Self-reflection has been linked to healthy psychological functioning and is precisely the type of self-attention that can lead to greater and more accurate self-knowledge. Self-rumination, on the other hand, represents anxious attention paid to the self, where the person is afraid to fail and keeps wondering about his or her self-worth. There's quite a bit of insecurity there, and the missing link is self-confidence. If I have established self-confidence, which comes from any and all of these sources: stable home, unconditional love, strong sense of strength, past success, strong identity, then I can bravely face negative feedback about myself, because I will not let it define me. I won't ignore it. I'll address it, but I know that I have evidence that defines me in an overall positive light. Self-rumination is the absence of self-confidence. It is the self-soothing that is always on the lookout for perceived slights and attacks on oneself. It's an ongoing justification process, an ongoing comparison process. Because self-confidence isn't present, a lot of mental energy is spent puffing oneself up. You see kids who come from unstable home environments have difficulty at school and with their relationships, because they don't have a solid foundation of their identity. They have to look for ways and constantly be on the guard for any kind of slights and attacks that may come there. Okay, so how can self-awareness increase your personal and professional effectiveness? First of all, we begin to live intentional, conscientious, effective lives. The more self-aware we become, the more we can step back and reflect on our reactions and choose to be more responsive in life. It allows us to recommit to change without being burdened by the idea of perfection. It also helps us to become more emotionally aware of our needs and desires, creating a greater skill in understanding our own nature, our limits, as well as the ability to communicate this information to others. Through this process, we slow down our reactive natures, increasing our ability to respond to the needs of others. It's not all about us. When I was working with staff, especially in some of these tougher situations where we're dealing with very skilled professional manipulators, okay, this is what they're fantastic at. I'd spend a lot of time in staff development saying, it's not about you. It has nothing to do with you. It's all about the kids in this situation, and so you cannot react. They're just trying to get a rise out of it. It's not about you. It's about them. Self-awareness helps us create healthy boundaries for ourselves and our relationships with others. Aware of the consequences of our actions, behaviors, and thoughts can reduce drama in our lives, increasing the amount of time we have to create the future that we want. We're not so reactionary. Our thoughts and emotions, adverse and positive, can be viewed objectively through self-awareness, increasing our responsibility and our accountability to others and ourselves. One surgeon that I worked with recognized that at the end of the day, he was just wiped out. He spent a lot of mental and physical energy concentrating on complex surgeries. The interactions, he was an introvert, so a lot of the interactions during the day kind of wiped him out too. And so he figured out at the end of the day he was wiped out, and if he pushed through and did his dictations, it would probably take him 1.5 to 2 hours. But if he went to dinner, went for a run, he could come back to that work and he could breeze through those dictations in about 45 minutes. His self-awareness about how he was wired and the waves of energy that he has led to an increase in his professional effectiveness. We have to become more aware of our biases. I'm telling stories on myself, and another one is not putting me in a great light here, but it serves as a great example. A decade ago, I was putting together my first management education series, and I was about halfway through the development when I was horrified to realize that I was teaching them that the ideal manager should be someone, just like myself. Absolutely. I was the model. And it was when I was developing a section on relationships and boundaries that I was advocating for strict boundaries and cautioning against friendships and those kind of things. And yet I could think of example after example after example of individuals who effortlessly changed roles. They were very effective, and their employees were better for it. So I had to just put on the brakes here and go, whoa, 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 whoa. This isn't, again, it's not about me. Okay, so it totally changed the direction of that management education series, and it really became about developing your managerial style. And in developing your managerial style, the first step is developing some self-awareness, and that's where I started implementing some personality tools to help with those efforts. Biases, we like people like us. We like people with similar personalities, and this can have huge ramifications for managers and leaders if they're not aware of this bias. The fact is that people who have opposite personalities and opposite preferences threaten us. They annoy us because they have strengths in our areas of weakness. So I will ask managers if they have any favorites among their reports, and the liars say no. So like an attorney who hears sustained to an objection, I rephrase the question. I say, who do you click with among your employees? Who's some of your best workers? I was working with a very competent director who brought me in to offer some assistance to one of her managers that she deemed needed a lot of development. We did some Myers-Briggs work. I used a couple other instruments, and then I commented to the director. I said, you do realize that the two of you are exactly opposite. Do you think that has anything to do with your evaluation of her? And it was like 1,000 light bulbs went off. Yes, of course. The director was a big picture and a macro manager. Her report was detail-oriented and needed a lot of specifics before moving forward with initiatives. The director viewed that as a lack of competence and assertiveness. She also found her annoying. But that change in perspective brought about a significant change in their working relationship. Insecure leaders don't get those employees, get in quotation marks, who aren't like them. They don't understand those employees who aren't like them. But on a much deeper and much more personal, intimate level, they don't feel like those employees get or understand them. And ultimately, all of us want to be known and understood. Quick tangent here on insecurity and leadership. Insecurity and leadership it's just a bad combination. If you've ever worked for an insecure leader, you know what I'm talking about. I remember thinking it's not part of my job description to make you feel good about yourself, and yet I may have spent a lot of time just building them up in the process when it should have been kind of the other way around. If I'm a leader and I'm not aware of my biases toward those who are like me, I may subconsciously downgrade your performance if you're not like me. If I'm a leader without self-awareness and you and I don't see eye to eye, then I will conclude there must be something wrong with you. You also recognize how others experience you. When you increase your self-awareness, you understand how others experience you as well. And I do this great exercise when I do my Myers-Briggs workshop, and I ask people if they're annoying and how people with opposite preferences see those people with different personalities. So these are some of the things that the list that they came up with. You may be too nice, sarcastic, a know-it-all, a Debbie Downer, antisocial, time waster, too uptight, slacker, likes to hear the sound of your own voice, too idealistic, too realistic, impolite, and the list goes on and on. Now, some of these things may be true of you, but they also may be misperceptions. But if you don't even know what the misperceptions are, you can't address them. They may be misperceptions. Let me say that again. But if you don't even know what the misperceptions are, you can't address them. And finally, you can monitor and adjust your personality for various individuals. Let's say you don't need much appreciation. You don't need much public acknowledgement, but it goes a long way with Janet. So write Janet a thank you note. You may be a verbal processor. You may do your best thinking out loud, but you can't help but notice everyone else around you is wearing headphones just to drown out the sound of your voice maybe. You may be too rigid on rules. You may need to find someone to help you determine what's truly important to stress about. I had a secretary who loved to share vacation pictures, and when I'm at work, I want to work. You know, and so, but I understood, okay, you know, we went through a few pictures. By picture 50, I had to really remind myself what her motivation was in that situation. And her motivation was just simply to share her life with me, some of her values and some fun that they had. And so I can relax, I can chill out a little bit. I can't interrupt her and say, you know what, I really need to get back to work. I can chill out for another 10 minutes and be present with her. People who recognize their personality begin to recognize that others have different personalities and make adjustments. We all would agree that we have different personalities and preferences, but we don't operate that way. We understand it on some level, but that's not how we operate. We operate under the unconscious assumption that the world sees and believes things exactly as we do. So how do we increase our self-awareness? Just winding down here. We're on the home stretch. How to increase your self-awareness. If you've never been through a 360, I highly recommend it. It can be a frightening experience. It could be a gut-wrenching experience. You may feel like some of those comments that you get, you feel like you're punched in the gut, but those words and opinions are a gift. Things that you may have never known about yourself before. And typically what I recommend with 360s, and there's tons of them out there, but I would recommend something that goes along with whatever your organization's values are, whatever the competencies of the position are, and make sure that it's anonymous. You want anonymous feedback. I've done a couple of them. I did one when I was going through the Stephen Covey training, and they caution you, and this is so true, but they caution you when you read these things to go to a place, don't overreact, don't get frustrated, because more than not, 85% of it is going to be good stuff, and there's going to be 15% in there, but you're just going to zero right in on that 15%. You're going to try to figure out who said this about me. I'm going to figure this out, and all those things, because it can get at some insecurities that you may have about yourself, but I'm so much better off for having known some of those more difficult things to hear about myself after going through that. Encounter groups, I don't know if there's anyone in this webinar that is a product of the 60s. This is where some of this started. But it's just really the ability to sit around in a group and to know and be known by others and have others serve as mirrors for yourself. I got to do an encounter group. It was a very surreal experience in my master's work because on Tuesdays we would study and learn academically about encounter groups, and on Thursday we would go be in an encounter group for an hour and a half with each other. And in fact, we did a retreat one weekend where we sat around in a living room for about 5 hours staring at each other and just coming up with various observations on one another. Fascinating. And I've been a huge proponent of group culture ever since, and I've led several small groups and just find them incredibly beneficial for all involved. Want to increase your self-awareness? Find a good mentor and find someone who's going to be honest with you and give them permission to be honest with you. Put the permission meter 10 out of 10. Tell them not to filter it. Just give it to you straight on some things that you can improve. And then finally, and this probably isn't a surprise if you've been paying attention at all in this webinar, that I would advocate for personality tests. This is where I start for managers. They got to start here. They have to have self-awareness because they are on a stage. My sales pitch to them is you're on a stage. You've got 100, pairs of eyeballs looking at you. And so if you don't own your stuff, good, bad, or otherwise, everyone else is going to be aware of it. So you better be aware of it too, because there's no hiding once you get on that stage in a leadership role. And so we start out with doing some Myers-Briggs work. So I'll end with this, some next steps here. I've got a webinar coming up in just a couple weeks called Myers-Briggs 101, Interpreting Your Personality. This is a paid event, but the event includes the price of an instrument. It's a great deal. You get the report, the actual Myers-Briggs report, and then we'll spend 45 minutes to an hour going through what the report talks about and making sure that it's a fit for you. Some of you may be saying, hey, wait a minute, I took that I took that years ago. Great, that's great. So, but I would follow up and say, okay, what did that mean? What did it tell you? Can you tell me your letters? How does it affect you in your daily life? And what I find is that a lot of times folks have taken the Myers-Briggs or other personality tests, but they haven't had their results explained to them and interpreted by a certified professional. And the Myers-Briggs people don't let just anyone sell and interpret their instruments. They must first become a certified consultant, which is a 5-day process. And like we talked about, I'm certified, but I'm also a master practitioner, and I help people understand and interpret their results that can make them effective on a day-to-day level. Once you know your letters and your personality, you can start understanding the tweaks that you need to make. Steve, I know your letters. Carrie, I know your letters. Susan, I've got a pretty good guess about your letters. But a lot of that stems from my own self-awareness about personality type, and then that can help me interact with others as well. So that's what I have for you. I appreciate your time and attention. I'm going to turn things back over to Ross, and we're going to see if we have any questions out there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Neil. As Neil mentioned, at this point, if you would like to submit a web question, you can simply type your question in the Q&A window provided on your screen and click Submit. So we're just going to allow for a couple minutes for the questions to start rolling in.
And I appreciate the comment from Carrie. So glad you could join us. It was good having you on the call.
Okay, looks like there's no questions today, Neil, so we're going to go ahead and conclude this. So everybody who's on the call today, you will receive an email with instructions on how to access a recording of today's webinar. I also encourage you all to check out Neil Eady's page on Convey, and definitely check out all of the business-related content that he has on there as well. And definitely look for for more of that in the future as well. So you will be auto-forwarded to Neil Eady's page. So definitely choose to follow him, check out his content, and Neil Eady, we will see you next time. Thank you for coming out today.
Thanks so much, Ross. Thanks, everyone.